Hello again, and welcome to this podcast from Duncan Cartlidge Online. This episode is a little different as we've added some music, courtesy of Kevin MacLeod of Incompetech.com. Please let us know what you think. I'm also joined by Barney, my fox red Labrador, who sneaked into the room today. So, if you hear strange sounds, it's Barney, not me. In this episode, we'll have a look at work-life balance post-COVID and the debate around working from home, retention, should it be scrapped, and finally, quantity surveying. Is it, as someone suggested in a LinkedIn comment recently, a failed profession? Cue music. So, let's start off having a look at work-life balance and working from home. 2020 was, for the construction industry, as it was for most sectors, a highly disruptive year due to the large falls in workload experienced at the start of the COVID-19 pandemic. A lot of work was paused on building sites during the early weeks of the first lockdown, which was April and May 2020. And according to the Office for National Statistics, in 2020, the value of new construction work experienced a record 16.3% fall, and new construction orders fell by nearly 12%, reaching its lowest level recorded since 2013, as building sites closed because of official guidance on restrictions of movement in Great Britain. People's working patterns were turned on their heads as working on site either stopped or was severely restricted, with many being forced for the first time to work remotely. The biggest change was the increase in remote meetings, an area where the changes made in response to COVID-19 appear to be here to stay. Many were surprised how effective remote meetings have been and were amazed at how their colleagues had adjusted, even those with low IT literacy, and we all know those. In addition to reducing travelling time, remote meetings were seen as to be more efficient, 1 hour rather than 2 and 3, less time wasted getting cups of tea, having toilet breaks, and generally less chit-chat. The fact that there were fewer meetings overall was identified as a benefit. Many meetings just don't happen now, involve far fewer people, or have been replaced by site-based discussion. In what is described as a snapshot on the impact of COVID on construction, the University of Loughborough interviewed a range of professionals about their COVID experiences, and this included construction directors, construction managers, subcontractors, health and safety professionals, etc., etc. The increase in working from home for those with suitable roles was identified as generally a positive trend, with potential for long-term use. The positives were thought to be improved productivity and reduced distraction. These factors were also reported by those who remained working in the offices, which now, of course, have fewer occupants, reduced travelling, improved home-work balance, reduced costs for both individuals and projects. However, it's not all good news, and the downsides have been identified as social isolation, resulting in poor well-being and mental health issues for some, a risk of overworking, and loss of interaction with colleagues. Several of the interviewees, who had previously been highly suspicious that working from home equated to watching daytime TV and mowing the lawn, had a road to Damascus conversion and became strongly in favour and sought to embed it in future projects with a few caveats. These caveats were availability of suitable workspace and equipment, so no working on laptops on the kitchen table, regular site days are scheduled to maintain relationships and ensure employees stay up to date and maintain team cohesion, and establish clear expectations regarding working hours, because just because hours may be variable and flexible, they should be constrained. In the immediate post-pandemic period, many leading quantity surveying firms were the industry's keenest advocates for new ways of working, with some firms stating they wanted to cut down the number of desks by as much as 40%, with staff expected to come into the office 2 or 3 days a week. One large quantity surveying practice added, "It's about how we develop meeting space and communal space rather than the factory 9 to 5. That thinking has gone." Or has it? In a major study by consultancy Timewise, the part-time and flexible working agency, they quizzed four household name Tier 1 contractors, all adopting new models of working on a large range of sites across the country. The goal was to identify if it was possible to achieve flexibility without budgets or deadlines being affected. Surprisingly, none of the firms reported negative impacts on budgets or timeframes, with some even suggesting there may have been productivity gains. The proportion of workers who said the working hours gave them enough time to look after their own health and well-being increased from 48% to a staggering 84%. A year later, the four contractors chose to continue with their flexible practices, and all have reported a drop in illness rates among their employees, bucking the post-pandemic industry trend. At the start of the project, nearly half of all the participants felt guilty if they started on site later or finished earlier than others on site. This proportion decreased to a third. Trusting colleagues working remotely increased, and the number querying whether colleagues working away from site are working as hard as those on site fell from 48 to 33%. A recent survey of around 20,000 UK construction workers revealed that half had had no work-from-home experience before the pandemic hit. The industry had to adapt quickly to new normal, which of course it did. But now the expectation is that this way of working will continue and be a big part of the way construction operates. However, I suspect the tide is turning in favour of site and or office working. Anecdotally, this seems to be the case even with the public sector demanding office attendance for 3 days a week. Some may question whether it is sustainable to expect remote working in the construction industry, as the majority of jobs require on-site presence. Or do they? Roles such as estimators, quantity surveyors, construction managers, project managers could easily be managed on a hybrid working model. In 2023, a survey from the Association of Project Management has found that the construction industry has the highest percentage of project managers working fully remotely among all sectors, with 54% of project managers in the construction industry currently working entirely remotely. This means that the number of project managers working remotely has more than tripled since the end of the COVID-19 pandemic. One impact of remote working I have noticed has been the reluctance of recent graduates to interact with colleagues when transported out of the university and into an office or site environment. For many graduates, their entire, or at least large parts of their university course, were delivered online with little or no campus time. Because many of the lectures were recorded or pre-recorded, there was no need to tune in at 9 a.m. You could stay in bed and catch up later. Exams switched from on-campus to online, and now the return of traditional on-campus examinations, students have to be cancelled as some are finding it very difficult and too stressful. Research shows that collaborative problem-solving leads to better outcomes. People are more likely to take calculated risks that lead to innovation when they are backed by a team. Group working encourages personal growth and job satisfaction. I believe this is more relevant to the construction industry than any other sector, with collaboration and coordination being essential ingredients of a successful design team. So, should flexibility be a no-brainer? It's a mixed picture. For those negotiating a new office lease, staff who have become used to flexible working argue that train strikes, cost of living pressures, and reduced stress make it more efficient and more productive when they're working away from the office at home or in a hybrid situation. Others say that interruptions, unsuitable unprofessional workspaces, and a lack of mentoring and development opportunities mean that 5 days in the office should gradually become the norm again. From a recruitment perspective, it is becoming more important than ever to adapt roles to suit the needs of workers to allow for a balanced lifestyle. Many are now craving that post-pandemic. In December 2022, the government announced plans to give workers the right to request flexibility from day one in a new role, and you may have noticed the number of jobs advertised as flexible or remote has become the norm. Now, let's have a look at the second topic. Retention. Should it be scrapped? It is estimated by the Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy, or the BEIS, that the total amount of retention held in the construction sector in England alone over the course of a given year is between an eye-watering £3.2 and £5.9 billion. In theory, the process is simple. An agreed percentage, usually 3%, is withheld from monthly payments by the client as a guarantee that when the job is practically complete, the contractor returns to make good any patent defects. If there are no defects, or when they are made good, the money should be released. It's important to realise that construction defects can be patent or latent. A patent defect is an obvious problem that anybody can see and point out, for example, a kitchen sink that leaks or defective brickwork. These defects often present immediately after the project completion and can be included in snagging, which really is why retention exists. Latent defects are less obvious and more difficult to point out. They are not often found until months or even years after the project is finished, for example, unstable foundations or defective damp-proofing. In the UK, few UK clients take out latent defects insurance, or as is sometimes called, a structural warranty, which means that defects that come to light years after handover often result in lawyers chasing contractors and subcontractors to establish liability. And this is done until this is done, the defects cannot be rectified. In France, for example, the 10-year latent defect insurance is compulsory and ensures that defects are put right immediately, and then the insurance companies attempt to find the culprit and recoup the costs, rather like car insurance. Latent defects insurance has never really caught on in the UK, probably because of the additional cost, although several underwriters offer this policy. Back to retention. Unfortunately, the current rules do not make it obligatory for clients to ring-fence retention monies, and in the case of insolvency, it is often added to the creditor's pot. The BEIS report found that 44% of contractors surveyed had, within the past 3 years, experienced retentions not being paid due to upstream insolvencies. When Cartlidge went into administration in 2018, millions of pounds of retention money was lost to subcontractors, many of whom subsequently went into receivership themselves. Who would be a contractor or a subcontractor? The government has recently issued proposals that companies could have to report on the proportion of money they withhold in retentions under new proposals designed to drive down payment waiting times. The new requirements could see companies having to report on the percentage of retention value held, data on when payments are released, and deductions from payments. According to the government, publishing the data could help tackle the problem of companies holding on to retentions and using it as working capital. The proposals come as the pressure intensifies on the industry, with more firms facing critical financial distress amid cost inflation and economic uncertainty. One view, sometimes expressed in the industry, about the pointlessness of retention is, as half the retention is released to the contractor on practical completion, the amount retained, usually around 1.5%, is not incentive enough for contractors or subcontractors to return to site. So what are the alternatives to retention? The two most popular alternatives are the retention deposit scheme and retention bonds. With retention deposit schemes, all cash retentions would be held within a government-approved retention deposit scheme and would be ring-fenced from other assets that a client or contractor may hold, so that in the case of any insolvency, the retention remains untouched. Although a step change for the UK, similar schemes already operate in some Australian states as well as Canada. The money deposited in a retention scheme will be returned immediately upon handover of the works, and at the latest following the expiry of the defects liability period. A bill was introduced into the House of Commons in 2018 and won very strong support. However, progression of the bill was frustrated by the parliamentary timetable, and it now needs to start its journey all over again with somebody prepared to take it on. Retention bonds are not new and are in effect an insurance policy that pays out if resources are required to make good defects. But of course, retention bonds are not cheap, and the cost of setting up such a policy could price out smaller contractors and subcontractors. And finally, I don't know whether you saw a discussion on LinkedIn over the past few weeks, started by a QS who dared to suggest that the quantity surveyor was, and I quote, the valuable unsung hero of the construction industry. The comment sparked a series of vitriolic posts, some by QSs, saying that this was nonsense and that the QS is a failed profession and should be confined to the scrap heap. The discussion seemed to revolve around the belief that the QS has diversified too much and should, so to speak, stick to the knitting, thus the same measurement. Perhaps the people agreeing with this sentiment themselves feel threatened by the QS. Watch this space. That's all for this podcast. Thank you for listening.